When people speak about Aizen, they are discussing a version of his character which technically doesn't exist. They debate the smirking mastermind, the Keikaku meme lord, the overpowered antagonist who had orchestrated everything from the shadows, but this is exactly what Aizen wants you to see. We are actually focusing on the reflection but not the source of the image. Even after Aizen was defeated and he spent time in Muken and had even fought alongside Ichigo, he is still being misunderstood as a character. Aizen manipulated, betrayed and destroyed countless lives, but understanding why reveals one of the most layered villains in all of anime and manga. Kubo embedded a lot of philosophical depth, mythological symbolism, religious parallels, and psychological complexity into the character of Aizen, and in this video I'll be delving into each of these aspects of his character which most people overlook. Let's start with Aizen's appearance and the first thing that everyone gets wrong. Remember those glasses that Aizen was wearing? Well, in actuality he had perfect vision. This is confirmed via Kubo's official fan club Club Outside in question 471, where he was asked, are Aizen's glasses just for show? The fan says, personally I thought that the reason he wore glasses was to make his face appear gentle, but I would like to know the real reason behind it. Kubo responds by saying, that's right, it is to make his face look softer. So he wore these glasses for over a century just to give himself a gentle appearance. This man deliberately wore an accessory that he didn't need purely to manufacture approachability, to seem softer, less threatening and more human. This isn't a disguise, it's systematic self-imprisonment in a persona designed to hide his true nature. When he crushes those glasses in the Soul Society arc, he's not being dramatic, he is shattering a prison that he maintained for longer than most Shinigami have been in the Gotei 13. The gentle Captain Aizen that everyone knew never existed. It was just an aspect of his Kyoka Suigetsu, the flower in the mirror, visible but yet utterly untouchable. Here's something that nobody connects. Aizen possessed all three of Japan's sacred Imperial regalia. The first is the sword, Kusanagi, the second is the jewel, Yasakani no Magatama, and the third is the mirror, Yata no Kagami. These three are symbols of the emperor and their divine sovereignty, which guarantees the legitimacy of their power. Kyoka Suigetsu embodies two of these regalia. The Zanpakuto itself is the sword or the Kusanagi, while the ability of Kyoka Suigetsu is the mirror or the Yata no Kagami. Then the third aspect is the Hokyoku, which is the jewel or the Yasakani no Magatama. All three are connected to Aizen's character, mirroring the imperial symbols that have never been seen by the public, but whose importance remains symbolic. He has the makings of an emperor, so somebody who is worthy to challenge the Soul King. When Aizen was defeated, he lost all three. Kyoka Suigetsu shattered as its power merged with his body. The Hokyoku rejected him. The irony does cut deep, as the man who sought to overthrow the Soul King and claimed divine authority lost the very symbols that would legitimize his power. There's also another layer. The Hokyoku's name itself references Hogyo, the formal term for an emperor's death, as it literally translates to crumbling of a mountain. Kubo was specific with how he named Aizen's wish-granting jewel. It was named after the term used for the death of an emperor. The foreshadowing was there from the beginning. Aizen's entire plan centered on bringing about the fall of the Soul King. To appreciate Aizen, we need to understand what destroyed any faith that he may have had in the system of the Soul Society. Technically, we don't ever get a backstory to Aizen, but we do learn some details that reveal why he went down the path that he did. In the beginning, Bleach's universe wasn't divided into the world of the living, the Soul Society, and Hueco Mundo. Reality was actually stagnant, as life and death existed in chaotic harmony. Progression and regression were cycling endlessly, nothing was moving forward. The situation was worsened by the formation of hollows that threatened total annihilation by consuming everything. In response, a being of near omnipotent power emerged out of nowhere. This was the Soul King. But the five great noble families, the ancestors of the Soul Society's ruling class, decided that reality needed structure, so they committed the greatest act of treachery imaginable. They didn't just imprison the Soul King in a crystalline structure, they systematically dismembered him, ripped out his limbs and his organs as they butchered an omnipotent god and crammed what remained into a crystal prison. The Soul King became a limbless, voiceless, powerless battery. He wasn't a ruler, not a conscious deity, but a mutilated existence maintaining cosmic balance, serving as a linchpin who possesses zero agency, will, or power. The ancestors of the noble families built the foundations of the Soul Society on top of this atrocity, and they erased all mention of it from history, but Aizen somehow learned the truth. Here's where some philosophical themes perfectly link to this. The Greek philosopher Plato proposed that reality exists in two layers: the visible world, called the world of appearances, and the intangible world, or the world of external forms and divine truth. The visible world, what we see and touch, is subject to change, death, impermanence. The intangible world represents unchanging truth. This is mathematics, absolute concepts, the divine realm where eternal forms exist. Plato argued that philosophers stand above common people because they can gaze into the intangible world and bring back knowledge to improve the visible world. Both Aizen and Urahara achieved this in some form. They discovered the truth behind reality. They learned of the original sin. They became Plato's philosophers by definition, as they ascended to that plane of knowledge that exists beyond appearance. But here's where Bleach inverts everything. The intangible world, the divine realm, the world of God has been corrupted. The original sin shattered what should have been eternal and perfect. The Soul King, who should represent the unchanging divine form, is actually a dismembered corpse puppet. Imagine if you were Aizen, someone brilliant, powerful, capable of seeing through every deception, and then discovering that the god that everyone worships is actually the greatest victim of treachery in existence. The system of the Shinigami lecture on and on about duty, balance, maintaining order, but their entire civilization is founded on butchering omnipotence itself. To Aizen, who values power and agency above everything, this wasn't just immoral, it was the ultimate insult to the very concept of godhood. Why would he ever bow down to that thing which he refers to as the Soul King? Why would he accept a system built on reducing supreme power to a tool? This is why he calls the throne empty, not because nobody sits there, but because what sits there isn't actually God. It's a violated prisoner who is masquerading as divine authority. Urahara had also seen the same truth. He stood in Plato's cave staring at the same horror, but his response was acceptance. Just because God is dead, it doesn't mean you mourn the loss. It means you recognize that we've moved beyond needing divine authority. Urahara realized that this grants us freedom while demanding that we create our own meaning through struggle and work. Urahara favored Nietzsche's approach, while Aizen's response was more in line with Plato's, that if the intangible world has been corrupted, then I'll restore it myself. I'll become what God should have been. I'll fill the throne not with a puppet, but with actual power, actual will, actual divinity. The final words that they exchange during the end of the Arrancar arc solidifies this. When Aizen says, "Urahara Kisuke, I despise you. You possess such great intellect, why do you not act?" Urahara is Aizen's equal. They have identical knowledge and capabilities, but Urahara lacks the will that is necessary to change anything. He is the philosopher who sees the truth but chooses to stay in the cave. Aizen cannot fathom how someone so brilliant could choose complacency over transformation, to choose stagnation over progress. This now brings us to Aizen's Zanpakuto called Kyoka Suigetsu, which literally translates to mirror, flower, water, moon. Flowers reflected on a mirror and the moon reflected on the water's surface. Something that is visible but has no substance. It's an illusion, a mere shadow or a phantom. The name Kyoka Suigetsu has 4 elements in the name: mirror, flower, water, and moon. So why does the release command of his Shikai shatter only reference the mirror? Because the mirror represents what everyone had seen. This was Captain Aizen, who was gentle and kind, offering tea and wisdom. That was the reflection the image constructed for others to see. Shatter breaks that facade and reveals the true intention. There is some cruel irony here. Even after shattering the illusion and revealing his goals, Aizen remains unreachable. beautiful, because Aizen has been shattering himself piece by piece his entire existence. The Chinese proverb behind Kyoka Suigetsu describes exactly this. The monkey sees the moon's reflection on the water and reaches for it, only to then drown. The flower in the mirror, the moon on the water, things you can see but never touch. Beauty exists beyond grasp, something visible but yet it has no substance. This does more than describe the ability of Aizen Zanpakuto, it actually describes Aizen himself. Everyone saw Captain Aizen, that was the reflection, the flower in the mirror. Nobody ever touched the real Aizen because the real Aizen existed somewhere else entirely. He was deliberately unreachable. The poem at the beginning of Bleach Volume 12, which features Aizen, states it explicitly. We think the flower on the precipice is beautiful because our fear makes our feet stop at its edge, instead of stepping forward into the sky like that flower. The flower grows where others can't reach, not because it's fearless, but perhaps because it's trapped there, growing in the only place that it can grow. And people call the flower beautiful because they don't understand it's not choice, it is in actuality isolation. The only way to escape Kyoka Suigetsu's hypnosis is to touch the blade before it releases. Physical contact, connection, the very thing that Aizen spent his life preventing. Gin figured this out because he stayed close to Aizen for decades, watching, learning, and waiting. When Gin finally touched Kyoka Suigetsu and he thought that he had won, Aizen had already transcended beyond the need of connection. He didn't just avoid connections, he actively cultivated them specifically to destroy them, and in doing so he was carving away pieces of himself. Every relationship that Aizen formed followed a pattern. He constructed bonds on supposedly equal grounds, he then severed them to prove his superiority. But if he is the one who constructed those grounds in the first place, the bonds were never genuine. They were mechanisms of control that were disguised as connection. The wording in his final battle with Ichigo matters. They speak in terms of realms and planes, measuring existence by hierarchical levels. Because in Aizen's worldview, he must always exist above and untouched. But what Aizen fails to consider is that the bonds he forms, whether if they are natural or under false pretenses, they are still real parts of him. So with him cutting them away to prove some point about his own superiority is literally self-mutilation. He's cutting away at himself. Look at young Toshiro Hitsugaya, who derives his entire self-worth from external sources. These are the people around him and his captaincy within the Gotei 13. His identity exists in the hands of those who he trusts, thus making him a perfect candidate for Aizen's manipulation. Long before the Soul Society arc had started, Aizen embedded himself within Hitsugaya's inner circle. There's an overlooked extra chapter showing Hitsugaya's birthday celebration. The people who cared enough to celebrate this special day were Momo and Rangiku, and alongside these two genuine well-wishers sits Sosuke Aizen. Aizen was positioned close to everyone that Hitsugaya valued. Hitsugaya's childhood friend Momo had worshipped him as his lieutenant. Her close friend Kira served as Gin's puppet, extending Aizen's reach, and Rangiku's connection with Gin put her directly in Aizen's crosshairs. Aizen used all of this to attack the core of Hitsugaya. The trust that he'd gained from Momo was enough to make her point her blade at Hitsugaya, fracturing his relationship with someone formative to his identity. During the Fate Karakura Town arc, Aizen doubled down on this, making Hitsugaya stab Momo himself while simultaneously breaking Hitsugaya's identity as a captain by demonstrating his overwhelming superiority over him. Tearing down the one captain who took the most pride in his captaincy was Aizen's declaration of superiority over the institution of the Gotei 13, and this declaration, like all others, came at the cost to Aizen himself. We now turn our attention towards Momo, with the quote, "Adoration is the furthest state from understanding." Momo worshipped Aizen. She had worked herself to the point of exhaustion to serve under him. She made him the center of her world, and because of that adoration, she never actually saw the true Aizen. She saw the gentle, kind-hearted figure that she needed, the idol that she had created within her own mind. Despite being one of the closest people to Aizen, she was the furthest from understanding understanding who he truly was. Aizen cultivated her devotion specifically to destroy it. Every relationship that he had was a test. Can anyone see past the image they've created of me? When they inevitably failed, it confirmed his isolation. It proved that he was right to stand on his own. The tragedy Aizen never grasped was that he ensured that they couldn't understand by deliberately showing them only what he wanted them to see. He controlled what people perceived of him, then he condemned them for not seeing past his own illusions. Momo couldn't understand Aizen because understanding him requires truth, and Aizen gave her only performance. He blamed her for failing a test that she could never pass, and he then punished her for this. We then turn our attention towards Gin Ichimaru and Kaname Tosen, who were two sides of a severed coin. Gin closed his eyes voluntarily to Aizen, while Tosen was literally born blind. This small distinction carries immense implications. Gin chose to walk in darkness, staying close to his target for decades. His eyes were shut by his own will. His representations point at sin, the snake that renews life by shedding skin, yet he threw his life away for what was stolen from Rangiku. He was consumed by revenge, but he colored it by stating that it was free will. Tosen lived perpetually in darkness on the other hand. His Bankai Enmakorogi references the Buddhist Lord of Hell, and it incorporates the 9 stages of decay, a meditation practice centered on observing corpse decomposition in order to understand impermanence. His Zanpakuto wasn't even originally his. He took it from his deceased friend's casket, yet his Bankai, which makes use of his blindness, is entirely his own. Both Gin and Tosen served Aizen based on similar foundations, on a code of justice warped by the world's cruelty, determination born from wrongs done to those close to them, but their paths diverged in the end. Gin died in Ichigo's arms, eyes finally opened to clear blue skies. What's reflected there isn't Aizen, but the confident figure Ichigo represents, finally filling Gin with relief. Tosen gained physical sight before his defeat, but he truly opened his eyes after, when doubts plagued him and his resolve wavered. To respect the promise that Tosen himself had demanded, Aizen struck Tosen down after his eyes were opened. After his resolve wavered, it didn't matter that the resolve was built on shaky foundations in the first place. This relationship was cultivated specifically to be cut down, consolidating Aizen's position as a benevolent lord. The deaths of both Gin and Tosen had further emphasized the crushing isolation of Aizen. Aizen had spent over a century cultivating this gentle persona of Captain Aizen of the 5th Division. Then he literally killed this character that he'd created to mark his journey's beginning. We've never seen Aizen's Bankai, the ability that exposes a Shinigami's truest, deepest essence. He definitely possesses a Bankai, but he hasn't revealed it within the series. Some of you may be wondering why. Well, it's because some or perhaps all of the things about himself that Aizen wishes to cut away are represented in that Bankai, and he refuses to expose that inner self to the outer world. The most blatant representation of self-mutilation is the Hokyoku itself. It's an artifact formed by the absorption of numerous souls, along with a fragment of the Soul King at its core. Ultimately, the Hokyoku fuses with Aizen's very soul. He claims that this gem is finally beginning to understand who he is, the god worthy of ruling above all. But in actuality, he's a lonely boy lashing out at the world. He's convinced himself to be a god. He's the flower on the precipice, but he is trapped in isolation. Kubo wasn't subtle with the parallels that Aizen has to Lucifer. Aizen's speech when he leaves the Soul Society mirrors Isaiah 14:13. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Compare this to Aizen saying, no one has ever stood atop of the heavens before, not you or I or the gods, but the unbearable vacancy of heaven's throne ends now. The English poet John Milton wrote an epic called Paradise Lost. This presents Satan not as pure evil, but as a figure who rebels against divine authority on philosophical grounds. Satan refuses to bow to humanity, refuses to accept a hierarchy that he views as unjust. He's cast down for questioning, for refusing, because God said so as sufficient justification. Paradise Lost explores the themes of free will as well as the moral consequences of being disobedient. The character of Sosuke Aizen occupies this same philosophical space, but Kubo adds layers that Milton didn't. Satan rebels against a truly omnipotent god. Aizen rebels against the lie of omnipotence. The Soul King isn't all-powerful, he's all powerless. Aizen isn't defying divine authority, he's exposing that no such authority exists in the first place. The irony is that both end up exactly where they fought against. Milton's Satan falls to hell. Aizen gets himself sealed within Muken, the deepest level within the Soul Society's underground prison. Both had sought to ascend to heaven's throne, but they ended up in the absolute inverse. Nietzsche argued that traditional morality, don't kill, honor authority, religious commandments, they're all social constructs that have been invented by the weak to control the strong. His Übermensch character recognizes this and creates their own values and transcends conventional limitations to pursue constant self-overcoming. Aizen slaughtered the Central 46 without hesitation because he doesn't recognize their moral authority. 46 bureaucrats hiding behind screens, making arbitrary judgments. When Aizen faces the Gote 13 captains and chooses not to kill them after defeating them, it's not mercy, he just sees them no longer as threats, so killing them serves no purpose. But Yamamoto must die because he embodies the Soul Society's history and values. Yamamoto isn't just a warrior, he's the living symbol of everything that Aizen is dismantling. This is the Übermensch in action. He's making decisions based on self-created values, rather than accepting society's moral framework. But the Aizen-Urahara dynamic becomes devastating here. Urahara represents Nietzsche's last man, someone who also sees the flaws of society. Urahara knows about the Soul King, he understands the original sin, he has the intellect to recognize the Soul Society's corruption, but he accepts it because that's just how the world works. This drives Aizen insane. Urahara has identical knowledge, capabilities, but lacks the will to power to actually change anything. He's the philosopher who sees truth but chooses the cave. Aizen's final words before being sealed capture his entire philosophy. The victor should speak of the way the world should be, not the way it is. This shouldn't be confused with arrogance, because this is the Übermensch's core principle. He rejects the world as being unchangeable. Winners don't adapt, they reshape reality according to their vision. This now brings us to the origin of Aizen's name, which stems from Raga Raja, known in Japanese Buddhism as Aizen Myo. This is the love-stained wisdom king. The primary ability of this deity is transforming worldly lust into spiritual awakening, turning earthly passion into enlightenment. Aizen from Bleach does exactly this. He transforms his passion for transcendence into spiritual evolution via the Hogyoku. Their mythology runs even deeper. Aizen Myo wields a Vajra, a ritual weapon that cuts through illusions, both a reference to Kyoka Suigetsu's illusionary power and to how Aizen sees through the Soul Society's illusions to the truth of the original sin. Aizen Myo is connected to the Chintamani jewel, a wish-granting gem in Buddhist mythology. The Hogyoku is Kubo's version of this very jewel. There's even a Shingon Buddhist ritual called Jewel Ritual of King Aizen. A statue of Aizen Myo is enshrined at Kuko-onji Temple in Kamakura, once the de facto capital of Japan. Karakura town in Bleach is the spiritual center of the world, and this mirrors Kamakura's historical significance. Kubo didn't just borrow surface aesthetics, he built Aizen's entire thematic foundation on this mythology. Here's the crucial inversion. Aizen Myo is depicted with flaming red skin, symbolizing overwhelming compassion. Just as with a mother overwhelmed by compassion for her only child, blood is flowing out of all pores in the skin of Aizen. Originally, before compassion dyed his skin red, Aizen Myo had pure white skin. Bleach's Aizen isn't passionate, he's cold. He resembles the original form before compassion, before connection, before warmth. His hair is swept back and immaculate, unlike Aizen Myo's wild hair symbolizing raw emotion. And the pure white Hogyoku evolved forms also mirror Aizen Myo's pure white skin. Aizen believes that his power and intelligence justify his godhood. But in Shinto, the divine entities called kami represent interconnected energy. They aim to maintain harmonious, balanced existence, emphasizing the importance of interconnectedness amongst all beings. Aizen, on the other hand, isolates himself. He places his ideals above all others. He views himself as the only one worthy of of ultimate power. His hatred for the balance maintained by the Soul King directly opposes Shinto ideals of godliness. In Shinto, life is sacred. Gods are associated with ensuring the preservation and continuation of life. Aizen's holification experiments disrespect the nature of life by disrupting the barrier between Shinigami and Hollow, trying to force transcendence rather than achieving enlightenment through proper means. He attempts to skip steps, to force a shortcut to godhood rather than earning it through wisdom. Shinto kami are not absolute. They don't exist to force mortals into submission. Aizen's vision of a perfect reality involves tyrannical rule over all things, the complete opposite of a Shinto divine being. We now look at the Espada, and Aizen had personally assigned each of the Espada with their respective aspect of death. Ulquiorra, for example, was giving nihilism, Stark had solitude, Baragon was given senescence, Haribel sacrifice, Noitra despair, for example. It appears as though he formed relationships with the Espada on the explicit basis of death itself. He saw himself reflected in their aspects of death, particularly Stark's crushing isolation. But when Aizen slashes Haribel and he dismisses the Espada as failures, he's not just being cruel, he symbolically severs his connection to mortality. Haribel represents sacrifice, and by cutting her down, Aizen symbolically rejects all of the aspects of death, as he sacrifices the Espada. It's his proclamation as the successor god figure that mortality has nothing to do with me anymore, God cannot die. Once the Hokyoku perfects his transformation, Aizen achieves genuine immortality. The Espada, his army of aspects of death, become obsolete the moment that he transcended the concept of death. There's even a poem within volume 48 of Bleach which backs this up. All people, imitations of apes. All gods, imitations of people. This reflects Aizen's contempt for hierarchies that elevate powerless beings to divine status. Within the Espada is a mirror that nobody discusses. This is the character of Stark and why Aizen recruited him. Stark explicitly had no will to fight. His power was so overwhelming that other Hollows died just by being in his presence. He split his own soul in half, creating Lilynet just to have someone to talk to. Some theorize that Aizen recruited Stark because he saw himself in Stark. Stark was born with power so overwhelming it created insurmountable isolation. Aizen was born with power and intelligence that separated him from everyone. Both suffered the curse of strength, being so far above others that connection became impossible for them. Stark didn't want to fight, he just wanted someone who could stand beside him without dying. Aizen recruited him because on some level, Aizen understood that yearning, the desire for an equal, for someone who could exist in the same space without the gap feeling infinite. Then there is Wonderwise, an Arankar that Aizen specifically modified. He stripped away Wonderwise's speech, intellect, memory, and reason, reducing this being to a single-purpose weapon, extinguer, an ability designed to seal Yamamoto's flames. When Yamamoto kills Wonderwise and calls it cruel, Aizen's response reveals everything. He says cruel. Once a soul becomes a hollow, it holds no meaning. Where do you see cruelty in giving purpose to such a being? Surely the true act of cruelty was your tearing that soul to pieces. This is Aizen's moral code in action. By his logic, hollows are purposeless beings. Giving Wonderwise purpose, even if it required destroying his sentience, was a gift. Yamamoto killing that purpose was the real cruelty. Because to Aizen, existing without a purpose is worse than existing as a tool. Better to be a sword in the hands of someone great than a meaningless existence consuming souls in Hueco Mundo. Aizen claims to despise the Soul Society for reducing the Soul King to a tool, but yet he does the exact same thing to Wonderwise. He creates a being whose only function is to serve Aizen's plans. He strips away Wonderwise's autonomy and he calls it mercy, but Aizen wouldn't see it that way. The Soul King is omnipotent power reduced to a powerless battery. Wonderwise was a purposeless hollow given meaning. In Aizen's mind, these are very fundamentally different things. Remember when Aizen enters the Dangai, he encounters the Kototsu, a being described as reason itself. This is a creature that exists as a fundamental law of reality within Bleach, and Shinigami cannot harm it. But despite this fact, Aizen obliterates it. Gin mentions that the Kototsu cannot be destroyed by Reiatsu, it's a being of reason, meaning spiritual power doesn't interact with it, it exists on a different plane. So the matter of destroying the Kototsu isn't about strength, it's about dimensionality and logic. Immediately after, Aizen tells Gin reason only exists for those who cannot live without it. He then declares, "Let us go to the edge of reason." This is Aizen transcending the fundamental limitations of reality itself. He isn't just overcoming Shinigami limits or hollow limits, he's overcoming the very concept of limitation, as he's becoming something that exists beyond even the framework of rational existence. Aizen philosophically and literally steps beyond the boundaries that define possibility. Nietzsche said reason chains humanity. Aizen literally destroys the embodiment of that chain. In Aizen's third Hogyoku transformation, a closed eye appears on his forehead. In most spiritual traditions, the third eye represents enlightenment, an inner spiritual eye that opens through awakening. It is supposed to be invisible, internal, and metaphysical, because true enlightenment isn't something that you show off and boast to others. It's an internal, metaphysical change. But Aizen's third eye is the complete opposite. We can physically see it and it is closed. And it opens not through enlightenment but through rage when Ichigo claims to be stronger than him. It's inverted enlightenment, or in other words, false transcendence that's driven by ego rather than wisdom and the death of ego. A physical manifestation of arrogance appears when his superiority complex is threatened. In the final Hogyoku transformation that we see, he becomes something monstrous. This is the outward expression of what he had internally become, the monster that he allowed himself to become as a result of his hubris, as it's stated within the Bleach Unmasked databook. Ichigo's transcendence came through sacrifice, letting go, accepting the loss of his power. Aizen's came through force, consumption, refusing to accept his limits. One achieved true enlightenment, though it was temporary, while the other achieved a grotesque parody of it. When Genichimaru had finally betrayed Aizen and temporarily had stolen the Hogyoku, Aizen thanks him genuinely. He says, "It's thanks to your presence that I finally succeeded in surpassing both Shinigami and Hollows." He elaborates, fear is necessary to achieve evolution. The fear that in one's current state, one could be destroyed at any moment. Gin was the only person who made Aizen feel fear, not through power, but through knowledge. Gin knew things, he watched everything, and he stayed close enough to learn weaknesses. This represented the constant possibility of betrayal. Aizen valued that, because fear creates pressure. Pressure demands evolution. If you're never threatened, never challenged, then you will stagnate. You can't transcend your limits if nothing pushes you towards them. This is Nietzsche's will to power in action. Constant overcoming requires constant opposition. Gin's threat, his lurking betrayal, the knowledge that he was always watching for weakness, this is the fear that drove Aizen to keep evolving and keep improving and to never rest. When Gin finally attacks, it's the culmination of decades of productive fear translating into evolutionary pressure that pushed Aizen to fuse more completely with the Hogyoku. This now brings us to Ichigo Kurosaki, Aizen's ultimate research subject. Aizen was there when Ichigo's parents met. He observed their unique pairing, a Shinigami and a Quincy, with the Quincy containing a hollow inside of her. When they had a child, Aizen paid close attention to it. He deliberately set up obstacles throughout Ichigo's life to test and force his growth. Every major conflict Ichigo faced, Aizen was behind it. Ichigo naturally embodied what Aizen needed the Hogyoku to artificially create. This was a perfect hybrid of a Shinigami, Quincy, Hollow, Fullbringer, and human. Ichigo existed naturally as what Aizen had to force himself to become. When Ichigo emerged from the Dangai, Aizen couldn't sense his spiritual pressure. Aizen wrongly assumed that he's so weak that I can't detect him. The supposed genius, the Übermensch, who understood everything, couldn't comprehend what Ichigo had become, because Ichigo transcended through bonds, through connection, through sacrifice for others. He achieved gained power by the exact method that Aizen had rejected and couldn't fathom working. During an interview at Jump Festa, Kubo stated that his writing philosophy is, if it is hidden, it is the flower. The most important aspect shouldn't be explicitly stated when writing a story. Kubo believes that it should remain subtle, hidden, requiring readers to discover it. This is partly why Aizen never got a backstory, and because Kubo doesn't want his readers to sympathize with his villains. Kubo intentionally kept his past obscured because revealing everything would kill the flower, the mystery and depth that makes the character compelling. That silhouette of young Aizen alone in darkness, that's all that we get, and it's enough for us. We don't need every detail to understand the weight of being born so different that connection becomes impossible for you. 10 years following the defeat of Yhwach, Aizen delivers the final speech of the series from his prison within Muken. He talks about courage, about how fear of death gives life meaning. In a world without death, people wouldn't search for hope, they'd merely exist without purpose. The act of existing while fending off fears is what makes life admirable. This is coming from an individual who had achieved immortality, who transcended death itself and discovered that existence without mortality isn't transcendence, it is in fact emptiness. Aizen thanks Gin for reminding him of fear, for the evolutionary pressure that comes from knowing you could be destroyed. Without that fear, there's no progress, no growth, no meaning. It's the most honest Aizen has ever been, acknowledging that what he sought, transcendence beyond death, removed the very thing that gives existence purpose. The struggle, the fear, the constant pushing against limitation. This speech doesn't come immediately after his defeat or even immediately after fighting Yhwach, it comes after years of reflection, 17 months of isolation that he had, then the experience of fighting beside Ichigo, then a decade more in Muken to process what all of this means. Kubo giving Aizen the final word of the manga is brilliant. The character who sought to transcend everything including death concludes by explaining why mortality matters. And it also answers the poems within the first few volumes of Bleach. In volume 1, the poem is "We fear what does not exist." Volume 2 continues, "People have hope because our eyes are unable to see death." The theme of death is closely linked to the entirety of Bleach, and it's fitting that Aizen explains that this fear that everyone tries to escape is exactly what makes life worth living. And well, this is pretty much all of the symbolism and deeper meaning which I've derived from the character of Sosuke Aizen. If there is anything that I have forgotten to mention within this video, then let me know by continuing the discussion about Aizen's character in the comments. One thing is for certain, Aizen definitely has a lot to think about during his 20,000 years of imprisonment within Muken. Lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next Bleach video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.